All right, everyone. It looks like we are live. Good afternoon, to everyone joining us. Welcome to the Water Finance and Management webinar series. My name is Andrew Farr, Managing Editor of Water Finance and Management, and it's a pleasure to have you joining us this afternoon. This webinar today is titled Staying Above Water, How to Bring Innovation into Water Management. Sponsored today by Bonfire. And we're really looking forward to this. So we figured we would do things a little bit differently today since we have a couple different presenters and some folks joining us, and we wanted to get everyone on camera and do this as more of a webcast. Right now, I'm gonna explain a little bit more about how we're gonna do this today. But I want to go through just a couple housekeeping items. Right now, we're going to launch a quick poll question, which you should see popping up on your screen. If you wouldn't mind answering that, we'd really appreciate it. It just helps us to get an idea of everyone who's online with us today. You can go ahead and answer that and then click that blue return to presentation button. You can also submit questions throughout the webinar today. You should see a questions box on the left-hand side of your screen. We're gonna be, as I said, we're gonna be having more of an open discussion today following our presentation. So we will be going through some Q&A, so to speak, but we certainly are going to be monitoring audience questions as they come in and taking a look at those. So if anybody has any questions throughout, please feel free to put the questions in the questions box. So as I mentioned today, our title and our focus, Staying Above Water, How to Bring Innovation into Water Management. So in our publication, Water Finance Management, if you're a regular reader, really from the start when we launched our publication close to 20 years ago, we always talked about how the topics that we covered as far as what was going on in the drinking water and clean water utility space. We cover a lot of issues from the executive leadership standpoint. In other words, what are the issues that the utility managers and the CEOs and the superintendents and even on the finance side, the CFOs, what kinds of issues are they dealing with in terms of making decisions and planning for the future? And so we're really going to get into a lot of that today. And we have an excellent, with that said, we have an excellent presenter to kick things off for us today. So I would like to introduce Mark Funkhauser, who is the president of FNA. And Mark Funkhauser served as the 53rd mayor of the city of Kansas City, Missouri, from 2007 to 2011, if memory serves, one-term mayor. And so it really will be fantastic to get the perspective of a former elected official on some of the issues that we talk so much about in the water sector. So Mayor Funkhauser, now I'm gonna turn things over to you now. You take it away, and we'll open it up for discussion a little bit later.
That sounds good, Andrew. Thank you very much. Chris, go ahead and put the first slide up with the speakers on it. And our speakers today are Jennifer Pasuti, who is the COO and CFO of the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority, Anthony Berry, who is the Director of Sales for Bonfire, and George Hawkins, who is founder and president of Moonshot Missions, and before that was head of the Washington, D.C. Water Agency, where when I was at governing, we made him a public official of the year. Next slide, please. The questions that we have is talk about the challenges here. I'm going to start with Jennifer. And Jennifer, talk about some of the challenges that you have been dealing with at the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority.
Sure, I'd be happy to, Mark. First of all, thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon. Thank you to my fellow panelists. A couple of the challenges facing PWSA, it's no secret that we have had many, many years of deferred maintenance. We have a lot of work to catch up on. We have also recently come under PUC jurisdiction. That was as of 2018, which kind of changed the rules for PWSA, but we were able to pivot very quickly and accommodate their jurisdiction. We're also facing for 2023 $300 million in capital improvements. And over that 5-year period, we're looking at $1.4 billion. We're looking at large diameter water main replacements, large diameter sewer replacements, getting the lead out of our system. So we have a number of challenges ahead of us. But I can say that, while we've had our share of challenges and we are facing our share of challenges, PWSA has really stepped up. So looking forward to discussing all of the ways that we've been able to do that with you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And then Anthony, I want you to take a broader look out, and you're looking across the country, and talk about the challenges and opportunities that you've seen in water agencies across the country, and how they relate to what you just heard from Jennifer. What's the same? What's different? What are you seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the main things that we're seeing is, for a variety of reasons, just this huge amount of work that's coming, that teams are trying to work on right now are coming around the corner, whether it's because there's been deferred work or work that was unable to be done, or because of federal funding or funding sources that are coming in that's creating opportunities for teams to take on projects that they were unable to do before. So I think there's a lot of opportunity that exists, and I think that's a lot of the tone that you're saying too, right, Jen? Is that there's a lot of things we can do, and you're doing a good job, but I think that doesn't make the mountain any shorter. It's still a lot of work that you need to do, and I think that's kind of been the sentiment that we're seeing. It's like there's a big opportunity for us to make a lot of changes, but do we have the right tools? Do we have the right people? Do we have the right processes in place? Are we equipped to actually handle what's in front of us? And that's been a lot of the sentiment that I've been hearing anyway.
And George, you are looking not just at the United States, but I think you've been looking globally recently. Talk about your perspective on the challenges and perhaps the opportunity that is facing local water authorities in the United States.
Sure. And first, I want to express my appreciation for being on this panel. Marcus, not only that you gave me some accolades in the past, how did I learn to be a good leader? I learned it a lot through your magazine and programs I did with governing. So I was able to do things because I learned at the shoulder of really good leaders. And so I'm grateful to be here with you. Second, I'm always glad to be on a program with Jen and anyone from the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority. My organization, Moonshots, had the chance to do some work in Pittsburgh. I actually came to Pittsburgh maybe 15 years ago when green infrastructure was being considered. I have a very warm spot in my heart for Pittsburgh, despite having been born and raised in Cleveland. How about that? It's a beautiful city, but it's it's amazing what the water utility is doing. It's one of the best run water utilities, in my view, in the country right now. So it's really nice to be here. What I would say that what you heard from Jen and the common themes are true worldwide, which is there is always more work than there is money to fund the work. That's a common, and that doesn't matter how wealthy or not wealthy. Of course, that is harder for a community or a region or a place that has lower income or a disadvantaged community, but it's true of every place. I know in DC, during the years I was there, most of the years when I was running DC Water, our economy was growing, but our proposed capital program was 3 times the size of the money we had to fund it. And that is true of every community in every jurisdiction anywhere in the world, if they are lucky enough to have a water utility and infrastructure, because there's many places that don't. And what that means to me is that it runs to the second question, which is how that money is invested becomes the most important question, not just because you're never going to have enough. And I know I learned the hard way at DC Water that we were not early on investing money to make our utility more efficient. It wasn't an issue that was on our mind as a public agency. How do you invest money to improve your balance sheet, reduce your operating costs permanently, more strategically identify where your capital dollars can be placed. And that's an evolution that happened over many years. But going to the comment that there's a tremendous amount of funding coming with the Infrastructure Investment Act, as well as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, is that's going to be a one-time 5-year infusion of funds, and how it's spent, despite being a high amount, will never be enough. So investing it in ways that save money and make utilities more efficient becomes paramount, and how we highlight those. So I know I talked a lot, but again, great to be on the program today, and back to you, Mark.
Thank you, George. And so you mentioned the various federal funding sources that are now available, and what those do is they present an opportunity to kickstart innovation. But the real way to bridge the gap between what we need and what we have in terms of the resources for water is ultimately innovation. Jennifer, I want you to talk a little bit about some of the innovations that you've done at Pittsburgh Water and Sewer.
I appreciate that opportunity, Mark. So a number of the innovations that we've used at the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority. So first of all, thank you, George, for that shout out for the work that you've done with PWSA is one of the ways that we've been innovative to really take a deep dive, as George said, to look at the efficiencies across our organization. So that's step one, taking a look at your internal processes and really understanding where you can gain those efficiencies and really tracking those metrics or KPIs throughout the organization. A second way that we've done that is really integrated a number of our current systems, but then also have applied additional systems. So I started here at PWSA in 2018, and we have since gained a number of efficiencies through various systems that we've implemented. And then finally, I would say our lead line service program. We've had a lot of innovative ways where we're able to identify and remove those lead service lines from our system with the goal of removing all of them by 2026. So we have a number of ways that we look at not just our capital programming, but our operations and maintenance to ensure that we are being efficient, that we are being strategic with those dollars.
Thank you, Jennifer. Now, Anthony, looking more broadly across the country, what innovations are you seeing? What are you recommending that water agencies undertake?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I have a bit of a biased lens on this, but really, I think for a lot of water agencies, to borrow a lot of the language that the other panelists have spoken about, it's, there's this big prioritization project and finding out ways to make the dollars make the biggest impact as they possibly can. And how I've been able to help other agencies, or how the team, my team has been able to help other agencies is by specifically taking a look at procurement and sourcing. It's a strategic investment where I think a lot of agencies see procurement more as a transactional sort of, part of their organization, thinking about, well, if, we're using procurement to source and negotiate contracts with these suppliers, if it's a procurement team who's finding these more innovative suppliers in the market, what type of investment or what type of thought could we be putting into that part of our organization is really the connecting force between bringing in new technologies, innovative suppliers, fulfilling those, creating those contracts, and then of course getting the fulfillment of them again is focusing on procurement. But I'll pass it back to you, Mark.
Thank you. And yes, procurement's a key barrier to innovation sometimes, and it can be a facilitator. Let's go to the first polling question. Go ahead and put that up there. So my organization has implemented or is in the process of implementing rate increases to cover higher operating costs. Take a minute to answer that, true or false, yes or no. And then we'll talk a little bit about the results. All right. So 80%, it's a small N of the people, but 88%. So most of the folks are doing rate increases of some kind, or they're contemplating rate increases to cover higher operating costs. On the one hand, you could argue that water has been underpriced for generations, and it's about due for a rate increase. On the other hand, this is a real challenge sometimes in terms of equity issues, and equity is appropriately top of mind right now for a lot of agencies. Jen, let's start with you. Are you folks anticipating rate increases? And if so, how are you wrestling with the equity question?
Yeah, and that is a great question, and it's always front of mind for PWSA. We are currently in a 2-year rate increase with the PAPUC. So we went to the PUC and we said, hey, we need funds to cover our operating expenses, debt service, things like that. And we were able to negotiate with them a phased-in approach, right? So we have part of that increase happen January 12th of 2022. And then the second phase of that rate increase happens January 1st of 2023. So working with our finance team, we're also contemplating when do we go back to the PUC for that next rate increase. But always front of mind is the affordability for our customers. And so working with the PUC, with other entities, and then internally, we have a very robust customer assistance program, always mindful of those folks who are most vulnerable in our communities. A lot of the projects that we do, particularly on the lead line service program, we do look at those EJ communities. We do look at those underserved communities as well.
Thank you, Jen. Anthony, your thoughts on rate increases and perhaps the equity angle?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mark. Honestly, I'll probably have to defer to the experts on this one. Just because I'm not in the midst of having these type of discussions, I don't want to comment on something that I'm not educated on. So I'll pass it off to someone else here, just to stay in my lane here.
All right. Wise man who knows where the lanes are and stays in them. George, I know you and I have talked about this for several years now. As the water is life, as the DC trucks used to say on the side. And so how do you see agencies wrestling with the need to raise the rates to cover something like the true cost while also considering equity issues?
It is perhaps the most important question that an agency faces. And every single year when I was at DC Water, we raised rates, usually significantly faster than inflation. And over the total number of years I was there, we tripled rates in the cities. That was in part because of multi-billion-dollar regulatory mandates that we had to fund. But to connect the rate, I'm going to answer the question in 3 quick parts. One is to connect it to the question you asked previously about procurement. I felt, and I did every rate hearing at DC myself. So I did more than 65 rate hearings over the years I was there in person. We went to every ward of Washington, DC in a location chosen by the council member from that ward, invited anybody who had communicated with us in the prior several years to come visit with me, the CEO, while I would stand in front of them in the room and explain what we were doing and why. And I felt I had 2 justifications I had to make every time I was presenting a rate increase. And the first, which is to me opening the door to a conversation about needing more money, is I had to be able to prove that we were doing more with the money they were already sending us than we did last year. So the only way I get to ask you for more money, I'll get to that in a second in the presentation, I have to prove that we're more efficient. So the stereotype of a public agency of being bloated and inefficient, you're just asking for, no, I can prove to you that when we replace a fire hydrant, when we're replacing a water main, all these various things we do by the metrics, it costs us less than it did the year before because we are implementing innovative strategies that are less expensive than the prior practices. That's technology, that's approaches, that's management structures. It's all of those things, what Jen is doing in Pittsburgh. Once I have proven to you that we are more efficient with your money, the next phase of the discussion is, so I need more, and what do I need it for, and why does it matter to you? So then we make a presentation of here is the additional revenue we need. Here is why we need it. And by the way, in your ward, this is what we're going to invest in with this capital money. And one of the ways we targeted our capital fund is to make sure every part of the city benefited in some way from the investments we were making. Then the final component of that justification is how do we manage and handle our lowest income customers, just as Jen said in Pittsburgh, because you absolutely have to have an answer for people who are unable to pay a higher rate for something essential to their livelihood, but you also can't hold back the rate structure for everybody else for revenue that you fundamentally need to deliver the service at hand. And most communities, not all, there are some states that do not allow this subsidy, but most communities can. And by the way, in all the hearings I ever had, we always subsidized, all the rate base would subsidize those people in the low income category so that their rates were lower. And I never had, and I've had people yell at me about virtually everything you can think of. I never once had a ratepayer say, I'm angry about the fact that my rate is 5 cents higher than it would be so that we can subsidize our lowest income neighbors. We got broad-based support for that. And having covered that base, that was the way we would go. And then we'll have to make a value proposition. Have I proven to you that we're a more efficient, more effective utility and will continue on that path, and that the money we're investing matters to you? This is a good investment for you and your livelihood. And if we can make that case, we think we will succeed. And by the way, we had unanimous support for every rate increase that we proposed following that practice. It was hard work. There was a lot of tough meetings, but it did succeed.
Thank you, George. Next slide, please. So the power of procurement, and the quote there is from George. It's it's in one of the articles that we at F&A wrote about funding water. Is that we have an opportunity here to do something different. I want to talk first with you, Jennifer, about procurement and how you're using the power of procurement at Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority. And interesting, you wear two hats. You're the chief operating officer as well as the CFO. So you're in a position to, I think, look more broadly at this procurement thing within your agency. So tell us about how you're using procurement differently, perhaps now at Pittsburgh.
Yes, it's a great question and a great topic, and one of the efficiencies that PWSA was able to gain since I've been here. Like I said, I started in 2018. Our procurement team was a team of one. We had one person managing all of the procurement for the organization. She does a fantastic job. She's still with us today, thank goodness. But we've expanded that team to 6 people. But we've also implemented a system called Bonfire that helps us streamline that whole procurement process from cradle to grave. So previously, when we had a team of one, it was emails, it was phone calls, it was in person, it was paper, it was disorganized. Now we have one system that, again, will take our procurement all the way from that solicitation to that contracting, to be able to have one source of truth for a solicitation that is going through. And when you're looking at a capital program of $300 million or $1.4 billion over the next 5 years, procurement is essential. We need to have transparency. We are a public organization that is absolutely non-negotiable, and our Bonfire system has helped us achieve that.
Thank you, Jennifer. And so, Anthony, we're now directly in your lane. Talk a little bit about how you're seeing procurement in water agencies be changed and made better.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And I think the biggest shift that we're seeing is, Jen's telling you the story that she told. It's just teams are recognizing that there needs to be an investment in this part of our organization because of the potential value that it can drive. And I think there's a lot of elements in terms of this will allow us to do things more efficiently. This will allow us to make sure that we're protected in case we're audited. This will allow us to do all the things that we need to be doing, and we are doing to some degree, but just a lot better with a lot more efficiency. And I think the other angle too that, procurement can be playing is speaking to more of what George was mentioning, where procurement can allow those dollars to go further, where we can find new suppliers, or we can find suppliers that allow us to operate at a lower cost than what we've done historically because of our ability to find, source new partners for us to work with, or potentially to find new technologies, right? I think that there's definitely the argument for in-house. We can just make sure that the ship operates better, but then also, above and beyond, and looking at like, how do we become more strategic? How do we become more innovative? Finding more partner suppliers to make sure that we're getting the best value for the dollars that we're spending, but also make sure that we're getting the best services and the best products in place as well for the work that we need to do.
All right, thank you, Anthony. Let's go to the next polling question. So, my organization's procurement system supports efficiency in purchasing. Go ahead and mark your answer there, true, false, or unsure. And we'll give you a second or two to do that. And then we will want to talk about that a little bit. All right, let's take a look at the survey, and it's interesting. The so far at least the leading answer is unsure. Shifting a bit here, but that seems to be the direction that it's going. And let's talk about these results a little bit. The organization's procurement system supports efficiency in purchasing. George, what do you think about that? Your thoughts as you look at these survey results come in?
It's a great question, and I loved the evolution that Jen described at Pittsburgh Water. It's so similar to DC Water. It's an area that most utilities don't focus on, at least at first. They're engineering organizations, and they're really focused on doing good engineering, and God bless, of course, that needs to be done. But when we were doing our capital program at DC Water, we always, because there's always more need than money, you characterize the potential projects into categories, and then you prioritize. So the first category in our prioritization for procurement was mandated projects. The second was water quality problems. The third was mayor or board level issues that they wanted to resolve. And I remember asking our CFO, this was several years into my tenure, there was a final category that was called good business practices. And we never funded it because we never got that far in the priority list. And I remember asking our chief engineer, what projects are in that category? We never fund it. And his response was, those are the projects that would make our business more efficient to operate. And I remember I felt like a ton of bricks at it. I was like, are you kidding? We don't fund the projects that would permanently make our business cheaper to operate, which would allow us, of course, permanently to have more money for all those other categories and more operating funds. That's crazy. We've got to figure out a way to fund that category. And the way we did that was by modifying our procurement system. Part of it was professionalizing it, just as Jen described. We hired our first ever chief of procurement. I sat him 2 doors away from my office, and I was in there like every single day because what we were able to do was so dictated by procurement. But the other part that we included in every procurement of size was a requirement of business planning. That this question of not only making a choice for low cost or otherwise, which of course is important, there was a factor that was formally reviewed about, is this the most efficient? It might cost a little more in price, but if the operating cost over time was significantly less, we could select that because of business efficiency. But if we hadn't asked that question, we may never have had that opportunity come forth because it's just a low price procurement system will always bring that lower upfront cost, even if you don't have the savings. And as soon as we implemented that business planning component of procurement, things began to change all over the enterprise. Procurement started driving innovation because it asked the right questions. And in the public sector, most procurement systems don't do that. And it's not because there's anything wrong. It's just historically it's been let's save money and go for the low cost bid. Well, it turns out that sometimes you can pay a little more money up front and then permanently have a system that's cheaper to operate. That is far better for your ratepayers. It's far better it's just so many good outcomes if you set the rules of the game that way. And I think that was one of the single most important elements to the success we then saw at DC Water.
Yeah, so the question isn't, is this an inexpensive procurement system? Or, we could get by, Pittsburgh could get by with one person in procurement. But what is the impact on our operating costs over the long run? That's what I'm hearing, is that's the big deal. Jennifer, I want to give you just a second. If you have a reaction to these poll results, I'd like to hear it.
It's such an important topic that, I appreciate everyone who responded to the survey. Certainly, here at PWSA, procurement was a big deal to us, again, given our deferred maintenance, given the backlog of projects that we have. I liked Anthony's response when he talked about, being able to get more players in the game. In Pittsburgh, you tend to see kind of those same folks bid on the same projects. And we were able to expand our vendor pool that way. We also have a goal within our organization for our supplier diversity program. It's a program that's important to our CEO as well as our board to increase the DBE businesses in our work. We actually just had a meet and greet with primes and subs last night. But our procurement tool is a way for folks to sign up for, those solicitations that might come through that they may be able to not just be a prime, but a sub on and see who is bidding on that and be able to make those connections. So again, they can be a beneficiary of the PWSA work in the city.
Very good. And Anthony, your reaction, if any, to the poll results?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think I'm not sure if the results ended up changing, but the most common answer, at least at the beginning, was, yeah, I'm not really sure, or I'm unsure. And that's an answer that we get a lot, right? I think for a lot of teams, they think about, again, procurement is the cog will keep spinning. Are the bids getting out? Are they getting done? Yes, they are. And for most teams, that's enough. And they're focused on, of course, all these other facets of the water management district, which feel like higher priorities. But I think what's clear, at least from Jen's story and George's story as well, is much like any division, right? Making this investment into procurement is one that will yield long-term dividends. But I think what makes procurement so interesting is because, if I were to say, how many people feel like they have a really good handle on what's going on in their engineering department? I mean, everyone would be like, oh yeah, we know what's going on there for sure, right? We absolutely know what's happening because it is a high impact part of the organization. And I think the core of what my message is, and hopefully what you can glean from some of these other stories, is that procurement can be a critical part of how your organization functions. So even thinking and asking those questions to yourself, well, if I don't know what's going on in my procurement function, is there room for us to add more sophistication? Is there a way for us to extract more value about how we make all of our formal decisions for who we partner with to come in and run a lot of these projects? But I think this unsureness is, again, not something that's uncommon, but I think is sort of a symptom of what the perception of what procurement is within an organization. And I think just thinking about, well, is there more value if we getting out of this team? Maybe there's a good thought process to go down in that lane.
Yeah, it's interesting, having looked at government agencies for years, and particularly looking at the finances of government agencies, what they do is they do two things. They hire people and they buy stuff. And if you pay attention to your HR system, you're going to do a better job of hiring people. And if you pay attention to your procurement, you're going to do a better job of buying stuff. Those two questions, those two issues sort of drive value in many cases. How do we hire people and how do we buy things? Let's go to the next poll question. All right, so This one is directly related to procurement because it's my organization has implemented or is in the process of implementing new technology to manage or reduce operating costs. In many of the interviews that I've done, people have told me that a barrier to new technology is the risk related, and it is the sort of traditional standard procurement process that makes it very difficult to try something new. So let's see what your answers to this is. Yes, true, you have implemented or are in the process of implementing new technology to manage or reduce costs. False, you have not done that, or unsure, you don't know whether or not you have implemented new technology to manage or reduce costs. And again, across government agencies, there seems to be fairly uniform understanding that in many cases, sort of the key to survival in the turbulent times that we're in now is the implementation of technology. So let's look at the survey results. Once again, a significant amount of unsure or false. So in both this and the previous poll, true, we have done that, is the laggard. It's the last one. So, Jennifer, I want you to talk a little bit about, you've talked about how you added staff and you brought in a technological system. Talk a little bit more about how you have designed procurement, focused on procurement to support efficiency.
So it all comes back to, again, that process from solicitation to award of a project. Being able to have everyone, again, have one source to go to be able to score, to provide comments, to look at those bids, to look at the supplier diversity participation, and to really be able to go through the entire process. And we're talking about very large projects here, and they're very involved, the solicitation. A lot of documentation that now is housed in one place, and everybody is looking at the same thing. Deadlines are set through that process, and our procurement team, can have that pre-bid meeting on time in making sure everybody has that notification, and that's not just internally but externally. Folks again can see who's bidding on that. So the whole process itself has been streamlined in a way that, by the end of when we select a vendor, everything has been in one place. Everyone has followed the same timeline and has all of the same information. And again, it's not being passed via email or paper or, an in-person meeting. Everyone is able to do what they need to do to be able to get us from, okay, we have this need, okay, we have somebody in place to address it.
It's interesting. As I listened to your answer, Jen, some of the writing and work that we have done in my company has been on creating and leading anti-fragile organizations, and this broad buy-in of lots of people, and lots of people having the access to the information and knowing what the decision is, why we made the decision, and so forth is a key element of anti-fragile organizations. Let's move to you, George. What's your reaction to this poll result?
I'm not surprised by it, and I love what you just said as you were concluding the previous section about hiring and procurement. Because one of my views of innovation in an organization is it's usually conceived to be technology. We're buying sensors or something. And by the way, it is. There's all sorts of interesting technologies that you can adopt in a utility. But I tend to think the innovations that change utilities the most are the way and manner in which they do things, their management structures. Just as Jen has described, professionalizing with key personnel, information that can be transparent, deadlines and procurement, that changes everything, because now every procurement that touches that is done in a different way, yielding just multiple outcomes. And I completely believe on personnel. Historically, public utilities would do low bid procurements, which did not allow the kind of value propositions that we're describing here that often drive innovations. And historically, public utilities would post a job and wait to see who applied. I thought my most important job at DC Water was putting together the best team on the field to work for DC Water. And that meant going out to recruit people, just like you would for a sporting team. And I was always on the lookout for good talent. So yes, we would post jobs, but we were actively recruiting and seeking the best talent available for our team. All of these suggest ways that are just a little different way of doing things. The last comment I'll make about innovation is historically it has been risk. We don't know whether innovations will work. My view, that's no longer a big issue. Many of the innovations we're talking about, like Bonfire, are well known. They have been implemented in many places. These are not like brand new things that we think might not work. There's tremendous track records of how this works and works with a utility that you can call and talk to if you're interested to how it works. I think the bigger issue that I've seen with utilities is having the personnel time to evaluate, select, and implement a new technology. Because that is all time that people need to add to their work schedule, which, by the way, is pretty heavy already. I'm going to learn about what's out there. I'm going to learn how it works. I'm going to do all the steps to put in. I'm in training to train people to implement something new. It's really people time that I worry most about, rather than does it work, or even finance, because now we have such significant infrastructure funds. And the last comment I'll make on that front, and I think Jen alluded to this, when we started innovation at DC Water, it was all ideas that came from our staff. We ultimately had innovations that were coming from all over, but we started with ideas that came from our team, so that they didn't feel like innovation was being done to them. They felt innovation was being done with them and for them. And when you have a team that thinks innovation is just because I thought of that idea, it makes my job easier, then they're interested and engaged and in favor of what you're doing, rather than you're doing what to my job? Is it taking it away, or who decided on that? And so involving the team and selecting and implementing is one of the most important attributes. And when that happens, it's amazing how quickly innovation can go forward.
Thank you, George. Anthony, reactions to this survey result?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think just to comment on or continue on the path that everyone else was speaking to. I mean, the idea of change is always a scary thing, but I think to give folks some reassurance on the line, it's just with the shift, and I'll speak mostly about technology, although I know change is not only catalyzed by technology. The types of technologies that exist today, which are cloud-based versus on-prem and can be deployed pretty quickly, those do make it easier to implement new technologies, specifically software technologies, if we're only talking about that lens. But I do agree with what George said, which is, I always talk about this very simplistic model, which is people, process, technology, and you got to consider all three of them in different lenses, right, to actually create change. What is the process that we're trying to reinforce or change, and how will the technology impact that? Do we have the people, and do we have people specifically with bandwidth who are there to actually, own the change of the software? Those are all factors that need to be considered when you're thinking about or trying to plan for introducing new technology to make some of these investments that we're talking about today. But I think that it's at least a very simple model to think about, because I think I talk to teams all the time, right? And one of the most common things I hear is, this all looks great. I don't know if my organization is ready for change. And that's a very fair question, a very fair stance to take. But then what I'll often say back is, okay, great. So let's say this technology is a good fit for what you want to accomplish. Let's talk about how it would impact those processes and what you have in place to do that. And let's talk about the people you have to support it. And there are times when organizations will go through that exercise and say, okay, I'm not there yet, but now I know what my gap is and I know what I need to solve for. So I can actually support this change in a little bit of time or after this changes. And then sometimes we have that conversation and teams go, yeah, you know what, there really isn't a gap. Now that I understand what the lift is from these different factors, I feel more confident about making that change. So, George, I know in one of the first answers, you spoke a lot about project planning and a lot about how that what that impact can have on, I think it was mostly through a construction lens, capital project type of lens. But I think even in a software lens, there's still a lot of benefit that can happen from planning. And I think, making the commitment to at least explore something, you can kind of work backwards from what our gaps are, and then again, create a plan to start that change when the organization is in a position to do so. But to say like, oh yeah, we'll just flip a switch and it comes on, I don't think that's what we're trying to encourage here. But I can at least encourage you to have a conversation about, is my organization in the right position where we have the capacity to take on and implement change through technology, through process change, through whatever it is.
Yeah, I like the order that you did that in too. People, process, technology. The technology comes in at the end after you've got the other things laid out. Very good. Let's go to the next slide. So we have an opportunity here to catalyze what we need to do. And we have, it's one-time money, but there is a lot of it. And we could use it to make innovations that will drive down costs over the long run. The time to invest is indeed now. Jennifer, let's talk first about Pittsburgh. What are the kinds of things that you're trying to do with the federal money there?
Yeah, so another good question and a really good opportunity at this point in time. We are embarking, the reason why our capital budget is so large is that we're embarking on what we're calling our water reliability projects. And these are once in a generation investment to modernize our water infrastructure here in Pittsburgh. So we have very large components throughout our system, some of which haven't even been touched in 100 years. And so we are going through the process of renewing that system. These are very large, very complicated, very expensive projects. And we are certainly looking to that federal funding to help us achieve that program.
So before I go on, I'm going to go to Anthony in a second, but I want to just mention to the audience, we have a couple of questions in the question box. And if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in there. We will try at the end to get the panel to address these questions. So then moving to you, Anthony, how are you seeing water agencies use the federal money, particularly, of course, in relationship to procurement and so on?
Yeah, what we're seeing so far is teams are using the funds to implement large capital construction projects, things of that nature. There's, of course, will be maintenance to those projects, and that's a cost that they're considering. But I think just because of the nature of the funds, they're looking at, well, what are spike projects that we can make the investment in, so that this way we can make a big improvement to the infrastructure we have, or add new infrastructure that we wouldn't previously be able to do. Of course, there's still the question of, the cost to maintain these, whatever the infrastructure is long term. But again, at least with the spike in funding, teams are looking at, how can we make a large impact or drive a big project that we've had sort of on the back burner for a while, right now. And I think, teams are looking to make that move because of the funds that have been, of course, made accessible through some of these federal grants.
George, you launched Moonshot missions just in front of all this money. If there was ever, your timing was absolutely perfect. And one of the points that you've made in the past to me is that this money is an opportunity to make a one-time investment in some cases that will, over the long run, reduce operating costs, which is really where you want to go. Talk a little bit now about how you see the smartest use of federal money by the water agencies.
Thank you, Mark. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And we formed Moonshot to help underserved communities do these kinds of projects. And we had slow and steady growth over the last several years. But it's a hard market because you're trying to help water utilities that by definition don't have any money. So it's hard to build a business that way unless there's foundations or philanthropic organizations that are willing to support you. And then with the infrastructure law, now this enormous infusion of funds is coming through the system, and there's money set aside for technical assistance because what's very different about these funds is that the Biden administration is focused on making sure a large percentage of the funding goes to underserved communities who have not historically accessed SRF funds. Anyone who's ever I ran an SRF program and I applied to an SRF program over the years, and it's not a simple process. When I first came to DC Water, my team didn't even want to apply to the SRF because the extra paperwork was not worth a slightly better deal. So a lot of underserved communities that are very hard pressed on personnel, again, mainly a people question, are going to have a hard time doing all the steps to apply for this funding. And that's exactly what Moonshot is designed for. So we have been selected as an environmental finance center on a national basis to help communities do that, and are functioning in that capacity now. But I would say two things. I was running DC Water when the ARRA stimulus funds came through in 2008, 2009. And what we saw then, because the focus was on hiring people, is that what we did was shovel-ready projects. Those were not designed to change the system, to lower your operating costs. We essentially at DC Water used those funds to take old valves and put in new valves, just like the old ones, except they were new. That's not a bad project, because a new valve is way better to have than an old valve, which breaks and corrodes and leaks and all the rest. But we didn't have a valve with a pressure sensor on it or a flow meter that could tell you all sorts of information about your system and allow you to operate it more efficiently, because we didn't have the time. That was the shovel ready. What we're very anxious to see with these funds, and I have this conversation with EPA officials all the time, is that we do end up with systems that are in a different structure at the end of this funding cycle than we started. If all we do is rebuild what we've got with exactly what we've already got, we'll end up with a system that's too expensive to run. We'll never have enough money. So we absolutely have to look at this investment through the lens, just as we've been describing, of how can these investments fundamentally alter the balance sheet, make this utility permanently less expensive to operate, make this utility need less operators when there's a crunch on personnel because of the sensors that can be put in associated with the training that's necessary. My guess is that a lot of smaller water utilities are going to have to band together and do group applications so that they can share costs and implementation and expertise in putting in some of these newer approaches. But the whole notion of transformation is front of mind. That's absolutely the opportunity before us, and we're excited to see how that can happen.
Your last point about banding together, one of the things that we've seen in the federal funding is that they're giving extra points, so to speak, if you band it together with other agencies. Let's go to the next polling slide. So my organization is actively prioritizing sustainability in finance and design and operation with regard to leveraging the federal investment in water infrastructure. So we have sustainability there, finance, design, operations, and of course we also, in the previous slide, we talked about the $550 million in the IRA for drought response and preparedness. So there's also sort of environmental sustainability is frequently top of mind, and certainly it's that, along with equity, is leveraged and leavened throughout the various federal legislation for these three big piles of money. So let's see how folks have answered this. Oh, what? Once again, unsure is a leader, and it's an interesting result here. So I'm going to start with you, Jennifer, and I want you to describe the extent to which Pittsburgh is actively prioritizing sustainability, and give us a concrete example or two, if you can.
Sure. So, looking at the question, talking about financing, design, operations, George's team, Moonshot Missions, came in and helped us look at our current processes when we talk about operations and maintenance. So that would be number one, look at your current processes. What can you do better? How can you do it more efficiently with less resources? Also diversifying your funding sources, right? So of course you have your ratepayer dollars, but again, like we just discussed, we have this, very, very good opportunity coming down the pipeline for all of us now. So again, where can you apply for those dollars? Maybe like you just said, partner with other organizations to be able to diversify your funding sources. Looking at loans and grants and coordinating with other entities are another way that you can be, a little more sustainable or a little more forward thinking in your financing.
Anthony, a reaction to these survey results?
Yeah, from the conversations that I've been having, I mean, it's not too much of a surprise. I think that teams are still trying to figure out what they want to do with the funds, and I think in a lot of cases, teams feel like there is a lot of administrative obstacle to actually access the funds, to actually use them. I mean, I think what I say when I speak with these organizations and what I'll say now is I think just really thinking about there's an opportunity to fundamentally change the way that your shop operates, and thinking about what you need to, do that extra bit of administration or make sure that we're spending those dollars in the right way with the right type of reportings. I mean, is it worth it to explore that, to gain access to these funds, again, to make a long-term investment? So for anyone who's on the fence or who's uneducated about, how do I actually access these funds? How do I make sure I use them? I encourage you to look into it and take a look at what it takes to apply.
I've seen that unsure with regard to the administrative hurdle and the financial reporting. The federal funds this time around, as compared to ARA, which George mentioned, they do require more accountability for how you've used the money. And that is daunting. George mentioned the SRF funds when he first got to the DC Water. Staff were reluctant to go through the paperwork and the hurdles, the red tape hurdles. That's still a fear in many agencies, particularly smaller agencies, which parenthetically, paradoxically, need the money more. George, your reaction to these survey results?
I'm not surprised by them at all, and this connects to one of the comments that I see in the question at the bottom, which is building parks, green space, and education areas. Because I think one of the reasons that I think this kind of investment is unusual for utility, historically, again, the way utility was run some years ago was what we invest our money in is new pipes and new valves, and if we have enough, and we never have enough. The question of developing a value proposition to your ratepayer so that they're a willing participant in the evolution of your agency, willing to fund your needs, is them seeing projects that benefit the community in which they live. And green infrastructure was an important, for example, a sustainability outcome was an important outcome for our ratepayers. It stored water just like other infrastructure we needed to build, but it built us community support in Washington, D.C., maybe more than anything else we did. Energy conservation is a sustainability matter, reduce costs on our balance sheet. We're a good project, but people loved the fact that we were doing that kind of project and leading the charge on energy efficiency. So these kind of sustainability projects, to me, are often directly beneficial to the utility, and it's classic, its costs and its operations, but it's also the transformation of a utility to a community pillar, which I know has happened in Pittsburgh, as Pittsburgh Water is now a fundamental and important enterprise in the community, helping to transform it and being a partner with the people that it serves. That just builds in a completely different relationship with who you're working with. And so sustainability, to me, is a fundamental focus for utility, but it takes effort and time. So helping utilities that are hard-pressed or underserved take the time to step back and think about these opportunities. It's not just going to be Moonshot. There's going to be a lot of us that need to band together to do that because there's so many that could use that support, but the outcome is so great.
Thank you, George, for jumping ahead to the questions. And let's do the next slide. And so we are going to talk about the questions now. Jennifer, I'm not going to ask you to respond to the parks and green space thing. George already did a commercial for Pittsburgh for that. I'd like you to take the question on how do you combat planned obsolescence? Is that an issue that you see in Pittsburgh, and how do you deal with it?
Especially as the question asks in technology and process controls, we do have a technology roadmap here at PWSA. Again, identifying the systems that we currently have, what are those systems that can help us gain efficiencies, and what does that long-term look like, right? So we do talk internally amongst different departments, ensuring that everyone has the tools or can share the tools that maybe others need to do their job. And so we plan that out through our operating budget and sometimes capital if it's a large enough expense. To really kind of hedge against those changing technologies and the technologies that we've implemented going forward.
So we're out of time. Put up the next slide, please. Okay, one of the questions is how do we get involved with Moonshot in the EFC program? And here is the contact information for all of our speakers. Feel free, they all would be more than happy for you to reach out with them. I'm sorry we ran out of time and did not get to all your questions, but we really appreciate the opportunity to share these ideas with you about innovation and procurement in helping us to manage the ongoing costs of water and wastewater systems in the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thanks to all of our panelists. Really appreciate it. And I just wanted to add before we sign off, we have we do have some other good questions that came in, and we can certainly work once we're offline to get those answered. So once again, thanks everyone. I think that was a great conversation. Hopefully our audience was able to get something out of it. Definitely a different topic area, kind of looking at these issues from the standpoint of procurement. So Mark and Jen, George, Anthony, appreciate it. And we'll go ahead and sign off. And thanks again to Bonfire for sponsoring this webinar. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care.